The summer heat in Phoenix, Arizona was suffocating that July evening, with temperatures still hovering near 105 degrees, even as the sun began its descent behind the desert mountains. 3-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat cross-legged on the cool tile floor of her apartment building's hallway, her tiny fingers carefully arranging the wild curls of her favorite doll, Sophia. The hallway provided blessed relief from their stuffy apartment where the ancient air conditioning unit wheezed and rattled but barely cooled the small space. Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, watched her daughter through the cracked apartment door while folding laundry. At 26, Maria worked double shifts as a certified nursing assistant at Phoenix General Hospital, her calloused hands a testament to the backbreaking work that barely kept them afloat financially. The hallway had become Emma's safe playground. During these scorching summer evenings, a place where she could spread out her toys while Maria caught up on household chores. "Mommy, Sophia's hair is all tangled," Emma announced in her sweet, high-pitched voice, holding up the well-loved doll with matted blonde hair. Her dark eyes sparkled with the innocent joy that only a 3-year-old could possess, completely unaware that in less than 10 minutes, her entire world would shatter. "I'll help you brush it in just a minute, Mia," Maria called back, her voice warm with exhaustion and love. She set down the basket of tiny clothes, Emma's colorful t-shirts and miniature jeans that seemed to shrink by the week as her daughter grew like a weed. The Sunset Gardens apartment complex wasn't much to look at, a weathered 2-story building with peeling beige paint and wrought iron railings that had seen better days. But it was home, and more importantly, it was safe. The neighbors looked out for each other, especially for Maria and Emma. Mrs. Chun from 2B always saved leftover soup for them, and old Mr. Patterson from downstairs had fixed Emma's broken tricycle just last week without being asked. That sense of safety was about to be obliterated. At 8:47 p.m., the tranquil evening was shattered by shouting from apartment 2D. Jake Morrison, a mechanic with a drinking problem and a hair-trigger temper, was having another explosive argument with his girlfriend, Tracy. Their fights had become increasingly frequent and violent over the past month, keeping the entire building on edge. "You're pathetic," Tracy's voice shrieked through the thin walls. "I can't do this anymore." The sound of breaking glass followed, then a heavy thud that made Emma look up from her doll with wide, questioning eyes. "What's that noise, Mommy?" she asked, her small voice tinged with worry. Before Maria could respond, Mrs. Patterson from 1A had already dialed 911. She'd made this call twice before in the past month, and each time the police response had been swift and professional. Tonight would be different. Officer Daniel Matthews received the domestic disturbance call at 8:52 p.m. while finishing his dinner at a gas station on Indian School Road. At 34, Matthews was a 12-year veteran of the Phoenix Police Department with a spotless record, at least on paper. What his personnel file didn't reflect was his growing dependence on alcohol to cope with the job stress, or his increasing carelessness with his canine partner. Rex, his 4-year-old German Shepherd, sat in the specially designed compartment of Matthew's patrol car, panting heavily in the desert heat. The 85-pound dog had been Matthew's partner for 2 years, trained in narcotics detection and suspect apprehension. Rex's training records showed exemplary marks across all categories, though those records had been carefully edited to omit several concerning incidents involving the dog's aggressive behavior around children. As Matthews drove toward Sunset Gardens, he felt the familiar warmth of whiskey spreading through his chest. The flask hidden in his duty bag had become his constant companion during these long summer shifts. Just a sip here and there to take the edge off. What was the harm in that? "Another domestic," he muttered to Rex through the partition. "Probably be in and out in 20 minutes. The patrol car pulled into the apartment complex's parking lot at 9:03 p.m., its red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across the building's facade. Matthews stepped out, his movements slightly less precise than they should have been, and opened the rear compartment to retrieve Rex. The German Shepherd emerged with eager intensity, his black eyes scanning the environment for threats or targets. Rex had always been high-strung, but tonight something seemed different. A restless energy that made him pull harder, against his leash and pant more heavily than usual. In the hallway, Emma continued playing with Sophia, now attempting to put tiny plastic shoes on the doll's feet. The approaching footsteps and jingling of equipment didn't alarm her. Police officers were good guys, her mother had always told her. They helped people and kept everyone safe. Maria glanced out at her daughter and decided to grab Emma's light jacket from the bedroom closet. The building's air conditioning had finally kicked in, and she didn't want Emma catching cold. It was a decision that would haunt her for years to come. 30 seconds that changed everything. "Stay right there, baby," Maria called, disappearing into the bedroom. "Mommy will be right back." Officer Matthews climbed the stairs to the second floor, Rex straining at the leash beside him. The dog's behavior was becoming increasingly agitated. His ears perked and his body tense with an energy that Matthews, in his slightly impaired state, failed to properly manage. Emma looked up from her doll as the tall police officer rounded the corner, his heavy boots echoing in the hallway. She smiled and waved, the way her mother had taught her to greet all the grown-ups in their building. "Hi, Mr. Policeman," she said in her sweet voice, completely trusting and innocent. That's when Rex saw her. What happened next unfolded in horrifying slow motion. The German Shepherd's training was supposed to distinguish between threats and civilians, between suspects and children. But something primal and violent had been triggered in the animal's mind. Perhaps it was the heat, the stress, or simply a fundamental flaw in his temperament that had been covered up for too long. Rex lunged forward with explosive force, the leash slipping from Matthew's surprised grip. The officer, his reflexes dulled by alcohol, fumbled for the lead as 85 pounds of muscle and fury hurtled toward the tiny girl sitting helplessly on the tile floor. Emma's scream of pure terror pierced the night as Rex's powerful jaws clamped down on her small arm, lifting her completely off the ground. Blood splattered the hallway walls as the dog shook his head violently, the way his ancestors had dispatched prey in the wild. "Rex, no!" Matthews shouted, finally snapping into action as he grabbed for his partner. But the damage was already being done. The attack lasted only 15 seconds, but those moments would echo through the halls of justice for years to come, challenging everything the community believed about the thin blue line that was supposed to protect and serve them all. The sterile white walls of Phoenix Children's Hospital emergency room had become Maria Rodriguez's world for the past 72 hours. She hadn't left Emma's bedside except to use the restroom, surviving on vending machine coffee and the crushing weight of a mother's worst nightmare. Emma's tiny arm was wrapped in layers of gauze and secured in a sling, the puncture wounds from Rex's teeth requiring 18 stitches and a tetanus shot that had made her daughter scream in agony. But the physical wounds were nothing compared to what was happening to Emma's mind. The once cheerful toddler now woke up screaming every few hours, her dark eyes wide with terror as she searched the room for the big bad doggy. She wouldn't let anyone in a uniform near her, including the kind pediatric nurses who tried desperately to comfort her. "The nightmares are normal," Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the child psychiatrist, had explained to Maria in hushed tones outside Emma's room. "Children this young don't have the cognitive tools to process traumatic events. Her mind is trying to make sense of something that makes no sense at all." Maria nodded numbly, though nothing about this felt normal. 3 days ago, her biggest worry had been whether Emma would eat her vegetables at dinner. Now she was learning terms like post-traumatic stress and psychological trauma, Words no parent should ever have to understand. It was Thursday morning when everything got worse. Detective Ray Sullivan from the Phoenix Police Department's Internal Affairs Division arrived at 9:30 a.m., his cheap polyester suit wrinkled and his breath smelling of cigarettes. He was a 20-year veteran with thinning hair and the weary expression of a man who had seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I need to go over what happened Sunday night," Sullivan said, pulling out a worn notebook and clicking his pen. "There are some discrepancies in the witness statements that we need to clarify." Maria felt a chill run down her spine. "Discrepancies? What kind of discrepancies?" Sullivan consulted his notes with the practiced indifference of someone who had delivered bad news hundreds of times before. "Officer Matthews states in his report that your daughter threw a sharp metal toy at his K-9 partner, Rex, which provoked the attack. He describes the object as a pointed metal truck that struck the dog in the head." The words hit Maria like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Emma was playing with her doll, Sophia. She doesn't even have any metal trucks." "Ma'am, I'm just telling you what's in the official report," Sullivan continued, his voice maddeningly calm. "Officer Matthews states that your daughter was behaving aggressively toward the dog, making loud noises and throwing objects. He describes her as uncontrolled and hostile in her interactions with the K-9 unit." Maria's hands began to shake with rage and disbelief. The idea of 3-year-old Emma being described as hostile was so absurd it would have been laughable, if it weren't so horrifying. Her daughter was afraid of butterflies, for God's sake. She cried when she accidentally stepped on ants. "Detective, you can't possibly believe that," Maria said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm. "Emma weighs 32 pounds. She's 3 years old. She was sitting quietly with her doll when that animal attacked her." Sullivan's expression didn't change. "I'm also obligated to inform you that there were alcohol containers found in your apartment during the initial response. Officer Matthews noted in his report that he could smell alcohol on your breath when he spoke with you that evening." The accusation was so outrageous that Maria actually laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the hospital corridor. "I don't drink, Detective. I'm a single mother working 2 jobs. When exactly would I have time to develop a drinking problem?" "The containers were photographed as evidence," Sullivan replied, flipping through his notes. 2 empty beer bottles in your kitchen trash can, and what appeared to be a wine bottle on your counter." Maria's mind raced back to Sunday evening. Mrs. Chun had brought over leftover Chinese food earlier that week, along with a bottle of cooking wine she'd used for a recipe. The beer bottles belonged to her neighbor, Mr. Patterson, who had fixed Emma's tricycle and asked to throw away his empties in her trash since his can was full. "This is insane," Maria whispered. "You're trying to make me look like an unfit mother to cover up what that officer's dog did to my daughter." "Detective?" Sullivan closed his notebook with a snap. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but I need to follow the evidence where it leads. Officer Matthews is a decorated police officer with 12 years of exemplary service. His K-9 partner Rex has been involved in dozens of successful operations with no previous incidents. What Sullivan didn't mention, what he couldn't have known, was that Rex's training records had been carefully sanitized by Sergeant Lisa Park 3 months earlier. The reports of the dog's aggressive behavior at community events had been deleted from the database. The incident at Roosevelt Elementary School, where Rex had lunged at a group of first graders during a career day presentation, had been attributed to crowd excitement and filed away in a drawer that would never see daylight. The web of lies was already being spun, and Maria was caught in the center of it. That afternoon, Police Chief Robert Harrison called a press conference outside Phoenix Police Headquarters. The cameras rolled as Harrison, a silver-haired man in his 50s with the practiced demeanor of a politician, stepped up to the podium, adorned with the department's seal. Yesterday evening, we experienced an unfortunate incident involving one of our canine units and a civilian. Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and carefully rehearsed sympathy. Our preliminary investigation indicates that the incident occurred when the civilian engaged in aggressive behavior toward the working police dog, resulting in a defensive response from the animal. Maria watched the press conference from Emma's hospital room, her hands clenched into fists as Harrison continued his carefully crafted narrative. I want to emphasize that our canine officers undergo extensive training and maintain the highest standards of professional conduct, Harrison said. However, when civilians interfere with working police dogs, especially through aggressive actions, there can be unfortunate consequences. We are reviewing our community education programs to ensure that citizens understand how to properly behave around police canine units. The reporters asked predictable questions about the victim's condition and the dog's training record. Harrison deflected most inquiries, citing the ongoing internal investigation. But his message was clear. This was a civilian problem, not a police problem. The officer involved, Daniel Matthews, is a 12-year veteran with an exemplary record of service to our community, Harrison concluded. K9 Rex has been involved in numerous successful operations and has never shown aggressive behavior toward civilians who follow proper protocols. As Maria watched the press conference end, she realized with growing horror that the truth was being systematically destroyed. Every official statement painted her 3-year-old daughter as the aggressor and Officer Matthews as the victim of circumstances beyond his control. The medical bills were already beginning to arrive. Thousands of dollars for the emergency surgery, the specialists, the medications. Maria's insurance through the hospital covered some of it, but the co-pays and deductibles were mounting faster than she could calculate. But more devastating than the financial burden was the realization that the system she had always trusted to protect her family was now actively working against them. Emma's innocent truth was being buried under an avalanche of official lies, and Maria felt utterly powerless to stop it. As she sat beside her sleeping daughter's hospital bed that night, watching Emma's small face twitch with nightmares, Maria Rodriguez made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. She was going to fight back. Maria Rodriguez's voice cracked with desperation as she left her 4th voicemail that Tuesday morning. Please, someone has to help us. They're lying about what happened to my daughter, and I don't know what else to do. She hung up and stared at the crumpled piece of paper with attorney phone numbers that Mrs. Chun had given her, each one crossed out after rejecting her case. The law office of Chun and Associates occupied the 3rd floor of a modest building in downtown Phoenix, wedged between a bail bondsman and a tax preparation service. Sarah Chun had deliberately chosen this location 15 years ago when she started her practice, close enough to the courthouse to be convenient, but affordable enough to serve the clients who needed her most. At 42, Sarah Chun had built her reputation one David versus Goliath case at a time. The daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, she understood what it meant to be powerless in a system designed for others. Her office walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings chronicling her victories against corporations, government agencies, and yes, police departments that thought they were untouchable. When Maria's desperate voicemail finally reached her on Wednesday afternoon, Chun was reviewing case files for an upcoming trial. Something in the young mother's voice, the raw pain mixed with determination, made her stop what she was doing and call back immediately. Mrs. Rodriguez? This is Sarah Chun. I got your message about your daughter. The relief in Maria's voice was palpable. Ms. Chun, thank you for calling me back. Everyone else said they couldn't help, that going against the police was too risky for their practice. Tell me what happened, Chun said, pulling out a legal pad and settling in for what she suspected would be a long conversation. For the next hour, Maria recounted the nightmare in excruciating detail. Emma's attack, the false police report, the media circus that painted her toddler as an aggressor. Chun took meticulous notes, her legal mind already identifying the inconsistencies and red flags in the official narrative. "I'll take your case," Chun said without hesitation. "But I need you to understand, this won't be easy. The police will fight dirty, and they have resources we don't. Are you prepared for that?" Maria's response was immediate and fierce. "They hurt my baby and then lied about it. I'm prepared for whatever it takes." Chun's investigation began the next morning with a records request that would have made any police department nervous. She demanded Officer Matthews' personnel file, Rex's training records, all incident reports involving the K-9 unit, and the complete case file from Emma's attack. The department's response was swift and predictable, a letter citing ongoing investigation and claiming most records were exempt from public disclosure. But Chun had been down this road before. She had cultivated sources throughout the justice system over her 15-year career, and she knew how to find information that departments preferred to keep buried. Her first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Detective Mike Guerrero, a 25-year veteran of the Phoenix PD, had been bothered by the Emma Rodriguez case since the night it happened. He'd arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the attack and had seen things that didn't match Officer Matthews' report. The kid's doll was still sitting there in the hallway, Guerrero told Sean during a clandestine meeting at a coffee shop near the airport. Just a regular baby doll with blonde hair. No metal trucks anywhere. No sharp objects. Nothing that could have provoked that dog. Sean leaned forward, sensing there was more. "What else did you see?" Guerrero glanced around nervously before continuing. "Matthews reeked of alcohol. I mean, not just a beer with dinner. This was serious drinking. His speech was slurred. His movements were off. I mentioned it to my sergeant, but the report that got filed said nothing about it. Would you be willing to testify to that?" Chun asked. Guerrero shook his head. "I've got 3 years until retirement. I can't afford to rock the boat now. But there are others who might talk, if you dig deep enough." Chun's next stop was the Phoenix Police Department's Records Division, where a Freedom of Information Act request had yielded Rex's sanitized training file. The records showed a perfect score in all categories: obedience, crowd control, suspect apprehension, and public interaction. But Chun's trained eye spotted something suspicious in the dates and formatting. She contacted Dr. Amanda Foster, a child psychologist who had begun treating Emma, and asked her to review the police department's claims about the attack. Dr. Foster's expertise in childhood trauma would prove invaluable in dismantling the department's narrative. A 3-year-old exhibiting hostile behavior toward a police dog? Dr. Foster said during their consultation, her voice heavy with professional skepticism. That's not just unlikely, it's developmentally impossible. Children Emma's age don't have the cognitive capacity for the kind of calculated aggression the police are describing. But Chun's most shocking discovery came from an anonymous tip that arrived in her office mailbox on Friday afternoon. The unmarked envelope contained photocopies of 3 incident reports that had been deleted from the official database. Reports detailing Rex's aggressive behavior toward children at public events. The first incident occurred 8 months earlier at Roosevelt Elementary School during a Career Day presentation. According to the original report, filed by Officer Janet Morris, Rex had broken free from his handler and charged toward a group of first graders, causing several children to fall and injure themselves in their panic to escape. The report noted that Matthews had been argumentative and defensive when questioned about his control of the animal. The second incident happened 6 months later at a community festival in Steele, Indian School Park. Rex had lunged at a 7-year-old boy who was eating cotton candy, requiring 3 officers to restrain the dog. The child's parents had complained to the department, but their concerns were dismissed as misunderstanding normal canine behavior. The third incident was the most damning. Just 3 weeks before Emma's attack, Rex had shown aggressive behavior toward children at a neighborhood block party. Sergeant Lisa Park, Rex's trainer, had filed a detailed report recommending the dog be removed from public interaction duties immediately. Her report described Rex as increasingly unpredictable around children and noted concerning escalation in aggressive responses. Chun stared at the documents spread across her desk, her heart racing with the implications. Not only had the Phoenix Police Department known about Rex's dangerous behavior, they had actively covered it up and continued to deploy him in situations where he could harm innocent civilians. But the most explosive evidence was yet to come. Chun's private investigator, Tony Marquez, had been conducting surveillance on Officer Matthews for 2 weeks when he captured the footage that would change everything. Matthews' patrol car was equipped with an internal camera that recorded the officer's compartment during his shift, standard procedure for departments concerned about liability and officer safety. What Marquez discovered was that Matthews had been drinking on duty for months. The footage showed the officer repeatedly reaching into his duty bag to retrieve a small silver flask, taking drinks throughout his shifts. On the night of Emma's attack, the timestamp showed Matthews drinking at 7:15 p.m., 8:30 p.m., and again at 8:45 p.m., just minutes before arriving at the Sunset Gardens apartment complex. Even more damaging was audio from Matthews' radio communications that night. His speech was noticeably slurred when he reported his arrival at the scene, and dispatch had actually asked him to repeat his location twice because his words were unclear. The cover-up ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Sergeant Park's warnings about Rex had been buried by Lieutenant Colonel James Burke, who was facing budget cuts and couldn't afford to lose a trained K-9 unit. Officer Matthews' drinking problem had been an open secret in his precinct, but the thin blue line of police loyalty had protected him from consequences. As Chun compiled her evidence file, she realized she wasn't just building a case against one bad officer. She was exposing a systematic failure that had put children throughout Phoenix at risk. Emma Rodriguez wasn't Rex's first victim. She was simply the first one whose mother refused to be silenced. But Chun also knew that the more evidence she uncovered, the more desperate the department would become to protect itself. And desperate institutions were capable of extraordinary cruelty toward those who threatened to expose their secrets. As she prepared to file the lawsuit that would shake the Phoenix Police Department to its core, Chun couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight was just beginning. The morning Sarah Chun filed the federal lawsuit against the Phoenix Police Department, the city of Phoenix, Officer Daniel Matthews, Sergeant Lisa Park, and Lieutenant Colonel James Burke. She knew she was crossing a line from which there would be no return. The 47-page complaint, filed in the United States District Court for the District of Arizona, sought $10 million in damages and demanded sweeping reforms to the K-9 program. The case caption read simply, Emma Rodriguez, by and through. Her mother and next friend, Maria Rodriguez, v. City of Phoenix, et al. But those dry legal words concealed a declaration of war against one of the most powerful institutions in Arizona. Chun had spent 3 sleepless nights crafting the complaint, knowing that every word would be scrutinized by teams of police union lawyers and city attorneys. The document laid out a devastating timeline of negligence, cover-up, and civil rights violations that read like a thriller novel, except every allegation was meticulously documented with evidence that the department thought they had successfully buried. This case is about more than one little girl's suffering, Chun told the assembled reporters outside the federal courthouse that Tuesday morning. This is about a pattern of institutional indifference to public safety that has put every child in Phoenix at risk. Maria Rodriguez stood beside her attorney, clutching a framed photograph of Emma taken just days before the attack. In the picture, Emma was laughing as she chased bubbles in their apartment complex's courtyard, her dark curls bouncing and her face radiant with the pure joy that only children possess. The contrast between that innocent image and the traumatized little girl now undergoing daily therapy sessions was stark and heartbreaking. "My daughter will carry the scars from this attack for the rest of her life," Maria said, her voice steady despite the cameras and microphones thrust toward her. But what happened to Emma was preventable. If the police department had acted on the warnings about this dangerous dog, my baby would never have been hurt. The Phoenix Police Department's response was swift and predictable. Chief Harrison called his own press conference 3 hours later, flanked by officers in dress uniforms and representatives from the police union. His message was clear. The department would vigorously defend against what he called baseless allegations designed to undermine public safety. Officer Matthews is a decorated veteran who has served this community with distinction for 12 years, Harrison declared. The Rodriguez family's lawsuit is an unfortunate attempt to blame police officers for a tragic accident that occurred when proper safety protocols were not followed. But Chun had a secret weapon that would shatter the department's carefully constructed narrative. Tony Marquez, her private investigator, had been cultivating sources throughout the police department for weeks. His breakthrough came from an unexpected ally, Roberto Silva, a maintenance worker at the police impound lot where patrol car video footage was stored before being transferred to digital archives. Silva had noticed that several hard drives containing footage from Matthew's patrol car had been scheduled for routine destruction, just days after Emma's attack, months ahead of the normal retention schedule. Suspicious of the timing, Silva had made copies of the drives before they disappeared into the department's shredder. The footage Silva preserved was explosive. It showed Matthews drinking from his silver flask repeatedly during his shift on the night of the attack. More damaging still was footage from earlier dates, showing Matthews drinking on duty, while Rex exhibited increasingly aggressive behavior in the back of the patrol car. But the most devastating evidence came from a completely unexpected source, a security camera at Rosita's Market, a small grocery store located 3 blocks from the Sunset Gardens apartment complex. The camera's wide-angle lens captured the street view, including a clear shot of Matthew's patrol car parked outside the store at 8:47 p.m. on the night of the attack. A timestamp on the footage showed Matthews sitting in his car for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, during which he could be seen drinking from his flask and appearing to struggle with Rex, who was becoming increasingly agitated in the back compartment. When Matthews finally drove toward the apartment complex, Rex was in a state of visible excitement that any trained handler should have recognized as dangerous. Chun arranged for the grocery store footage to be delivered to every major news outlet in Phoenix simultaneously, ensuring that the police department couldn't suppress or discredit it before the public saw the evidence. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The footage aired on the evening news across all 3 major networks, with legal experts analyzing every frame. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, a nationally recognized expert in police canine training, provided commentary that was devastating to the department's case. What we're seeing here is a complete breakdown in officer judgment and canine handling protocol, Dr. Hendricks explained as the footage played in slow motion. Any competent handler would have recognized the dog's agitated state and taken steps to calm the animal before approaching civilians. Instead, Officer Matthews appears to be intoxicated and completely unaware of his partner's dangerous condition. The public reaction was swift and furious. Phoenix Mayor Jennifer Walsh, who had initially supported the police department's version of events, suddenly found herself facing calls for a federal investigation. City council members who had praised Officer Matthews just weeks earlier were now demanding answers about the department's internal oversight procedures. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Emma, and the grocery store footage was viewed over 2 million times in the first 24 hours. Parents throughout Phoenix began sharing their own stories of concerning interactions with police K-9 units, painting a picture of a program that prioritized officer convenience over public safety. The police union's response was to double down on their defense of Matthews while launching a vicious counterattack against Maria Rodriguez. Union President Captain Michael Torres held a press conference where he questioned Maria's fitness as a mother and suggested that her agenda-driven lawsuit was motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern for her daughter's welfare. Officer Matthews is the victim here, Torres declared. He's being persecuted by opportunistic lawyers who want to second-guess split-second decisions made by brave officers in dangerous situations. But the union's strategy backfired spectacularly when local investigative reporter Jessica Morales uncovered Torres' own history of covering up officer misconduct. Her expose revealed that Torres had personally intervened to suppress complaints against Matthews on at least 3 previous occasions, including 2 involving alcohol-related incidents. As the media firestorm intensified, Chun received a call that would change the trajectory of the entire case. Dr. James Mitchell, a veterinary behaviorist who had been contracted by the Phoenix Police Department to evaluate Rex just 2 months before Emma's attack, was willing to testify about his findings. I recommended that Rex be immediately removed from active duty, Dr. Mitchell told Chun during their confidential meeting. The dog showed clear signs of stress-induced aggression and poor impulse control. I was told that my recommendations would be implemented, but obviously they were ignored. Dr. Mitchell's evaluation, which had been buried in the department's files, provided the smoking gun that proved the attack was not only predictable, but preventable. His detailed report described Rex as unsuitable for public interaction and recommended extensive retraining or retirement from service. Meanwhile, Emma's therapy sessions with Dr. Foster were revealing the full extent of the psychological damage inflicted by the attack. The 3-year-old suffered from severe nightmares, panic attacks triggered by loud noises, and an inability to be around any dogs, even friendly family pets. Dr. Foster's clinical notes painted a heartbreaking picture of a child whose fundamental sense of safety and trust had been shattered. As the lawsuit gained national attention, Chun found herself fielding calls from attorneys in other cities who represented families with similar experiences. A pattern was emerging of police departments across the country that prioritized protecting officers over acknowledging the real dangers posed by inadequately trained or psychologically unsuitable canine units. But with increased visibility came increased danger. Chun began receiving anonymous threats, and her office building was vandalized twice in 1 week. Maria's apartment was broken into. Though nothing was stolen, a clear message that her family was being watched. The stakes had never been higher, and Chun knew that the Phoenix Police Department would use every resource at their disposal to destroy her case and her clients. The real battle was just beginning, and the outcome would determine not only Emma's future, but the safety of countless other children who might cross paths with dangerous police dogs. As Chun prepared for the depositions that would expose the full scope of the department's negligence, she couldn't shake the feeling that powerful forces were aligning against them. But she also knew that the truth, once unleashed, had a power all its own. And the truth about Emma Rodriguez's attack was about to shake the foundations of law enforcement accountability across the entire country. The war room at Blackstone, Webb and Associates, looked like a hurricane had torn through a law library. Legal briefs were scattered across a mahogany conference table that could seat 20, while bankers' boxes containing thousands of documents created a maze throughout the opulent downtown office. At the center of this organized chaos sat Marcus Webb, the 63-year-old legal shark who had built his reputation, destroying police misconduct cases before they could reach a courtroom. Webb was a legend in law enforcement circles, a former prosecutor who had switched sides to defend police departments with the ruthless efficiency of someone who knew exactly how the system worked. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and his $3,000 suit remained crisp even after 14 hours of preparation. The Phoenix Police Union had hired the best, and they were paying him accordingly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Webb addressed his team of 12 associates and paralegals, "we are not just defending Officer Matthews and the Phoenix Police Department. We are defending the principle that police officers should not be second-guessed by civilians who have never faced the split-second decisions required in law enforcement." The defense strategy was as ruthless as it was comprehensive. Webb's team had spent weeks constructing a character assassination campaign that would make Maria Rodriguez appear to be an unfit mother seeking a financial windfall from her daughter's tragedy. Private investigators had combed through every aspect of Maria's life, looking for anything that could be twisted to support their narrative. Their first line of attack focused on Emma's age and reliability as a witness. Webb had retained Dr. Harrison Blackwood, a cognitive psychologist from Stanford University, whose testimony would argue that 3-year-olds were fundamentally incapable of providing accurate testimony about traumatic events. "Children of this age live in a fantasy world," Dr. Blackwood would testify. "They cannot distinguish between reality and imagination, particularly after experiencing trauma. Any statements made by this child are inherently unreliable and likely influenced by adult coaching." But Webb's most devastating weapon was his attack on Maria's fitness as a mother. His investigators had discovered that Maria had been prescribed antidepressants following a difficult divorce 2 years earlier, medication that Webb would argue indicated mental instability and an inability to properly supervise her daughter. "The evidence will show," Webb's opening brief stated, "that Emma Rodriguez was unsupervised and engaging in aggressive behavior toward a working police dog because her mother was impaired and not providing adequate care." To support this theory, Webb had located Dr. Patricia Crane, a child psychiatrist whose controversial theories about parental influence on childhood trauma had been largely discredited by mainstream psychology. Dr. Crane would testify that Emma's symptoms were consistent with pre-existing family dysfunction rather than the dog attack. Meanwhile, Sarah Chun was fighting a different kind of war in her modest downtown office. Unlike Webb's army of associates, Chun had only 2 junior lawyers and a paralegal, but what they lacked in resources, they made up for in determination and righteous anger. Chun's strategy was built around a simple principle: let the truth speak for itself. She had retained Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the senator, a renowned child psychology expert from Johns Hopkins University, whose research on childhood trauma testimony had revolutionized how courts handled cases involving young victims. Children Emma's age are actually more reliable witnesses than adults in many ways, Dr. Warren explained during her deposition preparation. They lack the cognitive sophistication to construct elaborate lies, and their memories of traumatic events are often startlingly accurate in their core details. But Chun's most powerful ally was federal judge Patricia Williams, a 60-year-old African-American woman who had been appointed to the bench 15 years earlier after a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney. Judge Williams had seen every dirty trick in the legal playbook, and she had little patience for lawyers who tried to victimize children twice, once through the original trauma and again through the legal system. The first major battle occurred during pre-trial motions when Webb petitioned the court to exclude Emma's testimony entirely. His brief argued that allowing a 3-year-old to testify would violate Officer Matthews' due process rights and set a dangerous precedent that could destroy police officers' careers based on the unreliable statements of traumatized children. Chun's response was swift and devastating. She filed a counter-motion that included video testimony from Emma's therapy sessions, showing the child's consistent identification of Rex and her visceral terror when shown photographs of German shepherds. More importantly, Chun had discovered a precedent-setting case from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that had upheld the testimony of a 4-year-old victim in a similar police misconduct case. Judge Williams' ruling was a crushing blow to the defense. Not only would Emma be allowed to testify, but the court would provide special accommodations to ensure her comfort and safety during the proceedings. Emma would testify via closed-circuit television from a child-friendly room adjacent to the courtroom, with only her mother, Dr. Foster, and a court reporter present. The Constitution guarantees every victim the right to be heard, Judge Williams wrote in her ruling. Age alone cannot disqualify a witness, particularly when the testimony relates to events the witness personally experienced. Webb's response was to escalate his character assassination campaign against Maria Rodriguez. His team leaked selected portions of Maria's medical records to friendly reporters, painting a picture of an unstable single mother who had failed to protect her child. Conservative talk radio hosts picked up the narrative, describing the lawsuit as an attack on law enforcement by professional victims and anti-police activists. The psychological pressure on Maria was enormous. She had to endure reporters camping outside her apartment building, anonymous phone calls threatening her safety, and the constant fear that Emma might be photographed or approached by aggressive journalists. The stress was taking a physical toll. Maria had lost 15 pounds and was surviving on prescription sleep aids and endless cups of coffee. But the most devastating attack came when Webb's investigators discovered that Maria had been arrested for shoplifting 10 years earlier as a teenager, charges that were later dropped when it was discovered that she had been covering for her younger brother, who had actually committed the theft. Webb leaked this information to create a narrative that Maria had a history of dishonesty and criminal behavior. Chun fought back with evidence that painted a completely different picture of Maria's character. Letters of support poured in from Maria's colleagues at Phoenix General Hospital, where she was known as one of the most dedicated and compassionate nursing assistants in the facility. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the head of pediatric care, wrote a particularly powerful letter describing Maria's selfless work with sick children and her reputation for going above and beyond her duties. Maria Rodriguez is exactly the kind of person you would want caring for your child during the most vulnerable moments of their life, Dr. Martinez wrote. Her dedication to her patients and her own daughter is beyond question. The legal maneuvering intensified as the trial date approached. Webb filed motion after motion, attempting to exclude evidence of Rex's previous aggressive incidents, Officer Matthews' drinking problem, and the department's cover-up efforts. Each motion was met with fierce resistance from Chun, who understood that Webb's strategy was to death by 1,000 cuts, to overwhelm her small team with so much legal work that she wouldn't be able to properly prepare for trial. Outside the courthouse, the case had become a national symbol of the broader debate over police accountability and the rights of victims. Protesters gathered daily, with pro-police demonstrators facing off against civil rights activists in sometimes heated confrontations. The media coverage was intense and often sensationalized, with cable news shows treating the case as entertainment rather than a serious examination of institutional failure. But amidst all the legal warfare and media circus, the heart of the case remained unchanged. A 3-year-old girl had been brutally attacked by a police dog, and the system had failed to protect her both before and after the incident. As the trial date approached, Shun knew that all the legal maneuvering in the world couldn't change the fundamental truth of what had happened to Emma Rodriguez. The question was whether a jury would be willing to hold powerful institutions accountable for their failures. or whether the machinery of legal intimidation would succeed in burying the truth beneath an avalanche of procedural objections and character assassination. The real battle was about to begin. The child psychology wing of Phoenix Children's Hospital had been transformed into something resembling a cross between a therapy center and a military command post. Dr. Amanda Foster had worked with traumatized children for 15 years, but she had never faced a case where the stakes were so high or the pressure so intense. Every session with Emma Rodriguez was being scrutinized by teams of lawyers, expert witnesses, and media analysts who would dissect every word the 3-year-old spoke. Emma sat in her favorite spot, a tiny purple chair surrounded by stuffed animals, while Dr. Foster carefully arranged a series of photographs on the low table between them. The photos showed various dogs, golden retrievers, beagles, poodles, and yes, German shepherds. Emma's task was simple in concept, but monumentally important in practice. Identify which dogs looked like the one that had hurt her. Can you show me which doggy looks like the one that was mean to you? Dr. Foster asked gently, her voice carefully modulated to avoid any leading inflection that Webb's team could later claim as coaching. Emma's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Her small body tensed visibly when she saw the German Shepherd photographs, and she instinctively scooted her chair closer to her mother, who sat quietly in the corner taking notes. With a trembling finger, Emma pointed to the picture of Rex, the same German Shepherd who had attacked her 3 months earlier. "That one," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's the bad doggy." Dr. Foster documented everything. Emma's physical reactions, her verbal responses, the consistency of her identifications across multiple sessions. Week after week, Emma selected the same photographs with unwavering accuracy. When shown pictures of Rex mixed with images of other German shepherds, she identified him correctly every time. But the preparation went far beyond simple identification exercises. Dr. Foster had to help Emma understand what would happen during her testimony without traumatizing her further. The concept of testifying in a courtroom was impossible for a 3-year-old to grasp. So Dr. Foster created elaborate role-playing scenarios using dolls and stuffed animals. "Emma, remember how we practiced talking about the bad doggy to help other people understand what happened?" Dr. Foster would say during their sessions. "Some grown-ups are going to ask you questions about that day, and it's very important to tell them the truth about what you remember." The sessions were emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Emma would often dissolve into tears when shown pictures of German shepherds, and her nightmares had become so severe that Maria had to sleep in Emma's bed most nights. The trauma was compounding itself. Emma was not only dealing with the original attack, but also with the stress of being the center of a legal and media firestorm. Maria watched her daughter struggle through each therapy session with a mixture of pride and anguish. Emma was so young, yet she was being asked to carry the weight of exposing institutional corruption and police misconduct. The pressure was enormous, and Maria questioned daily whether putting her daughter through this ordeal was the right decision. "Some days I wonder if we should just take whatever settlement they offer and walk away," Maria confided to Dr. Foster during one particularly difficult session. "Watching Emma go through this is killing me." Dr. Foster's response was both professional and deeply personal. "Maria, what happened to Emma was not just an isolated incident. If you don't fight this, it will happen to other children." Emma's courage could prevent future tragedies. Meanwhile, Sarah Chun was conducting her own intensive preparation in the conference room of her law office. She had converted the space into a mock courtroom, complete with cameras and television monitors to simulate the closed-circuit testimony setup that Emma would use during the actual trial. Chun practiced asking Emma questions in different ways, working to find approaches that would elicit clear, truthful responses without leading the child. The legal team had to navigate an impossible balance. They needed Emma's testimony to be compelling and believable, but they couldn't coach her responses without violating ethical guidelines and providing ammunition for Webb's team. Every question had to be carefully crafted to allow Emma to tell her story in her own words. Chun brought in child advocacy specialists from across the country to help with the preparation. Dr. Susan Martinez from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children flew in from Virginia to review their approach and ensure that Emma's rights were being protected throughout the process. The key is to let Emma control the narrative as much as possible, Dr. Martinez advised during a strategy session. Children this age are remarkably honest about traumatic events, but they need to feel safe and supported when sharing their experiences. The defense team, meanwhile, was conducting their own preparation with ruthless efficiency. Webb had hired child psychology experts, whose job was to find any inconsistency in Emma's statements that could be used to discredit her testimony. They analyzed hours of therapy session recordings, looking for moments where Emma's account varied even slightly from previous versions. Dr. Harrison Blackwood, Webb's expert witness, was preparing to argue that Emma's testimony had been irreparably contaminated by months of therapy and legal preparation. His strategy was to paint Dr. Foster as an overzealous advocate who had implanted false memories in Emma's mind through suggestive questioning and repeated exposure to images of German shepherds. What we're seeing here is a classic case of memory contamination, Dr. Blackwood explained to Webb's team during their preparation session. This child has been subjected to months of intensive therapy focused specifically on this incident. Her memories are no longer her own. They've been shaped and distorted by well-meaning but misguided adults. The technical preparation for Emma's testimony was as complex as the psychological preparation. Court technicians worked for weeks to set up a system that would allow Emma to testify from a child-friendly room while still maintaining the constitutional requirement that defendants have the right to confront their accusers. Multiple cameras would capture Emma from different angles, while speakers would allow her to hear questions from the attorneys and judge. The room where Emma would testify had been decorated with her favorite cartoon characters and stocked with comfort items, her stuffed elephant Peanut, coloring books, and juice boxes. Dr. Foster would be present during the testimony to provide emotional support, while Maria would sit just outside camera range where Emma could see her, but the jury could not. Judge Williams had ruled that Emma's testimony would be limited to specific questions about the attack itself. She could not be asked about complex legal concepts or be expected to understand the broader implications of the case. The questioning would be restricted to simple, direct inquiries about what she saw, heard, and felt on the night of the attack. As the trial date approached, the pressure on everyone involved reached a crescendo. Emma was having increasingly vivid nightmares, often waking up screaming about bad doggies and asking her mother why the mean people wanted to hurt her again. Maria had lost 20 pounds and was surviving on antidepressants and sleeping pills prescribed by her doctor. Chun was working 18-hour days, reviewing evidence and preparing for every possible attack that Webb's team might launch. She knew that Emma's testimony would be the emotional centerpiece of the case, but she also understood that putting a traumatized 3-year-old on the witness stand was an enormous risk. If Emma broke down during questioning, or if Webb managed to confuse her, the entire case could collapse. The night before Emma's scheduled testimony, Dr. Foster conducted one final preparation session. Emma seemed calmer than she had in weeks, perhaps sensing that the ordeal was finally coming to an end. When Dr. Foster asked her once more to identify the dog that had hurt her, Emma pointed confidently at Rex's photograph. "That's the bad doggy," she said with the simple certainty that only children possess. "He hurt me, but I'm going to tell the truth about it." As Dr. Foster tucked Emma into bed that night, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and heartbreak for the little girl who was about to carry the hopes of her family and the weight of justice on her tiny shoulders. Tomorrow, Emma Rodriguez would become one of the youngest witnesses in federal court history, and her simple words would either expose a conspiracy or be dismissed as the confused rambling of a traumatized child. The preparation was over. The battle for truth was about to begin. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix had never seen anything like it. By 6 a.m., 3 hours before proceedings were scheduled to begin, news vans lined the street like an army of electronic sentinels. Reporters from CNN, Fox News, NBC, and ABC had set up elaborate broadcasting stations on the courthouse steps, while protesters gathered behind police barricades holding signs reading, "Justice for Emma," and "Support our police." Inside the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse, Courtroom 3A buzzed with an electric tension that veteran court reporters said they had never experienced. Every seat in the public gallery was occupied, with a waiting list of over 200 people, hoping for last-minute cancellations. The media section overflowed with journalists from across the country, their laptops and recording devices, creating a technological fortress along the back wall. Judge Patricia Williams entered the courtroom at exactly 9 a.m., her black robes flowing as she took her place behind the mahogany bench. At 60 years old, she had presided over countless high-profile cases, but she understood that today's proceedings would likely define her legacy. The constitutional questions surrounding child testimony, police accountability, and the rights of victims would reverberate through the legal system for decades. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying the weight of history. "Today we will hear testimony from Emma Rodriguez via closed-circuit television. I want to emphasize that this courtroom will maintain the dignity and respect that this young witness deserves. Any disruption will result in immediate removal from the proceedings." In the adjacent witness room, Emma Rodriguez sat in her tiny purple chair, surrounded by the familiar comfort items that Dr. Foster had carefully arranged. At 3 years and 4 months old, Emma was wearing her favorite dress, a pink sundress with white flowers that her grandmother had bought for her birthday. Her dark curls had been carefully braided by her mother, and she clutched Peanut, her beloved stuffed elephant, against her chest. "Are you ready to talk to the nice judge?" Dr. Foster asked gently, kneeling beside Emma's chair. "Remember, you just need to tell the truth about what happened." Emma nodded solemnly, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that no child should possess. "I remember the bad doggy," she said quietly. "I'm going to tell them about it." On the large television screens, positioned throughout the courtroom, Emma's image appeared with startling clarity. The jurors, 12 men and women from across Maricopa County, leaned forward unconsciously as they saw the tiny figure who would provide the most crucial testimony of the entire trial. Several jurors were parents themselves, and the sight of Emma's innocent face created an immediate emotional connection that no amount of legal maneuvering could overcome. "Good morning, Emma," Judge Williams said, her usually stern voice softening considerably. "Can you tell me your name?" "Emma Rodriguez," came the small voice through the courtroom speakers, clear and confident despite its childish cadence. "And how old are you, Emma?" Emma held up 3 fingers proudly. "I'm 3 years old, but I'm going to be 4 on my birthday." The simple exchange drew smiles from several jurors, but the atmosphere in the courtroom remained tense. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table, his silver hair perfectly styled and his expression carefully neutral. He had built his career destroying witnesses far more sophisticated than this 3-year-old, but he understood that attacking a traumatized toddler required surgical precision rather than his usual sledgehammer approach. Sarah Chun began her questioning with the gentleness of a kindergarten teacher, asking Emma about her favorite toys, her stuffed animals, and the games she liked to play. These preliminary questions served multiple purposes, They allowed Emma to become comfortable with the process, while demonstrating to the jury that she was a normal, well-adjusted child capable of providing coherent answers. Emma, do you remember the night when something happened with a doggy? Chon asked, her voice carefully modulated to avoid any leading inflection. Emma's demeanor changed immediately. Her small body tensed, and she pulled Peanut closer to her chest. Yes, she whispered. The bad doggy hurt me. Can you tell us what happened? For the next 10 minutes, Emma recounted the attack in her own words, using simple language that carried devastating emotional impact. She described playing with her doll Sophia in the hallway, hearing footsteps on the stairs, and seeing the big policeman with the scary doggy. Her account was remarkably consistent with her previous statements, delivered with the honest directness that only children possess. The doggy was mean, Emma explained, her voice growing smaller as she relived the trauma. He jumped on me and hurt my arm. I was scared and I cried for my mommy. In the courtroom, several jurors wiped away tears as they listened to Emma's testimony. The child's obvious distress was heartbreaking, but her clarity and consistency were undeniable. Even Webb's carefully constructed arguments about memory contamination seemed hollow in the face of Emma's simple, honest recounting of events. Then came the moment that would change everything. Emma, Sean said carefully, we're going to show you some pictures of different doggies. Can you look at them and tell me if any of them look like the doggy that hurt you? On a separate monitor, visible to Emma, but not to the courtroom audience, a series of photographs appeared. Different dogs of various breeds and sizes. Emma studied them carefully, her small finger tracing across the screen as she examined each image. But the real test came when Court Officer Janet Morrison led Rex into the courtroom as evidence. The German Shepherd, now 4 years old and weighing nearly 90 pounds, was muzzled and held on a short leash by his current handler. Rex had been retired from active duty following the lawsuit, but his imposing presence filled the courtroom with tension. The moment Rex appeared on Emma's television screen, her reaction was instantaneous and visceral. Her eyes widened with unmistakable terror, the same expression that had been captured in dozens of therapy sessions over the past months. Emma's small body began to tremble, and she instinctively shrank back in her chair. But then, with a courage that seemed impossible for someone so young, Emma lifted her tiny arm and pointed directly at Rex. Her voice, though small and shaking, cut through the courtroom silence like a sword of truth. Bad doggy, Emma declared, her words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. That's the bad doggy that hurt me. The courtroom erupted in gasps that seemed to echo off the marble walls. Juror number 7, a grandmother of 4, covered her mouth with her hand as tears streamed down her face. Even the usually stoic court reporter paused in her typing, overwhelmed by the power of the moment. Judge Williams banged her gavel, calling for order, but the emotional impact of Emma's testimony had already swept through the room like an earthquake. On live television, millions of viewers across the country witnessed the moment when a 3-year-old girl's simple words exposed months of institutional lies and cover-ups. Bad doggy, Emma repeated, her voice growing stronger with each repetition. He's the one who hurt me. In the witness room, Dr. Foster placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. You did it, sweetheart, she whispered. You told the truth. Marcus Webb rose to begin his cross-examination, but the damage was already done. How do you attack the credibility of a 3-year-old who had just identified her attacker with such clarity and emotion? How do you argue with the innocent honesty of a child who had been brutally attacked and was now facing her fear with remarkable courage? Webb's questions were gentle but persistent, attempting to create doubt about Emma's memory and understanding of events. But each attempt to confuse or discredit her only served to highlight her consistency and truthfulness. When Webb suggested that Emma might be confused about which dog had hurt her, she responded with the simple logic of childhood. "No, mister," Emma said firmly. "I remember the bad doggy. He's right there." As Emma's testimony concluded and she was led away by Dr. Foster, the courtroom remained silent for several long moments. Everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary, a moment when the simple truth spoken by the most vulnerable witness had cut through all the legal maneuvering and political posturing to reveal the heart of the matter. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had swelled to over 1,000 people. When news of Emma's testimony spread through social media, the hashtag #BadDoggy began trending within minutes. The video clip of Emma pointing at Rex and declaring "bad doggy" was viewed over 5 million times in the first hour, becoming one of the most powerful pieces of testimony in legal history. Emma Rodriguez, at 3 years and 4 months old, had done something that teams of lawyers, investigators, and expert witnesses had struggled to accomplish for months. With 2 simple words, she had exposed the truth and changed the course of American justice forever. The jury deliberation room on the 4th floor of the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse had been designed for calm reflection and careful consideration of evidence. 12 leather chairs surrounded a polished oak table with legal pads and water glasses positioned precisely at each seat. But for the past 4 hours, the room had been charged with emotion, as 12 citizens grappled with one of the most compelling cases in recent legal history. Margaret Chun, no relation to Sarah Chun, a retired teacher and grandmother of 6, had been elected jury foreman on the first ballot. At 68, she had seen enough of life to recognize truth when she heard it, and Emma Rodriguez's testimony had left an indelible mark on her conscience. "I keep seeing that little girl's face," Margaret said to her fellow jurors as they began their final deliberation. "The way she pointed at that dog and said 'bad doggy,' there was no question in her voice, no hesitation, just the honest truth of a child who had been hurt." The evidence presented during the 3-week trial had been overwhelming. Sarah Chun had methodically dismantled every aspect of the Phoenix Police Department's cover-up, presenting a timeline of institutional negligence that stretched back months before Emma's attack. It deleted incident reports, Officer Matthews' drinking problem, Rex's history of aggression, and the department's systematic suppression of complaints had painted a picture of corruption that even Marcus Webb's skillful defense couldn't overcome. But it was Emma's testimony that had sealed the verdict. The jury had watched in real time as a 3-year-old girl confronted her attacker with remarkable courage, identifying Rex with absolute certainty despite months of trauma and intimidation. The simple power of those 2 words, "bad doggy," had cut through all the legal complexity to reveal the fundamental injustice at the heart of the case. The jury's decision was unanimous. The Phoenix Police Department, Officer Daniel Matthews, Sergeant Lisa Park, and Lieutenant Colonel James Burke were all liable for violating Emma Rodriguez's civil rights. The monetary award was equally decisive. $2.3 million in compensatory damages, plus $500,000 in punitive damages, designed to send a clear message that such conduct would not be tolerated. When Court Clerk Jennifer Walsh read the verdict at 4:17 p.m. on that Friday afternoon, the packed courtroom erupted in a mixture of cheers, tears, and applause that Judge Williams allowed to continue for nearly a full minute before calling for order. Maria Rodriguez collapsed into Sarah Chun's arms, sobbing with relief and vindication after months of being vilified as an unfit mother, seeking a financial windfall. "Emma did it," Maria whispered through her tears. "My baby girl told the truth, and they believed her." But the impact of the Rodriguez case extended far beyond the walls of the federal courthouse. Within hours of the verdict, attorneys general in 17 states announced investigations into their own police K-9 programs. The Department of Justice, under pressure from civil rights organizations and child advocacy groups, launched a comprehensive review of K-9 training standards nationwide. The reforms that followed were sweeping and unprecedented. The Emma Rodriguez Police K-9 Accountability Act, passed by Congress just 8 months after the verdict, established federal standards for police dog training, mandatory psychological evaluations for both handlers and animals, and strict reporting requirements for all K-9-related incidents. The legislation also created a national database to track problem animals and handlers across jurisdictions. Officer Daniel Matthews faced consequences that extended far beyond the civil verdict. The Maricopa County District Attorney's Office, emboldened by the federal jury's findings, filed criminal charges including child endangerment, filing false reports, and drinking while on duty. Matthews ultimately pled guilty to reduced charges and served 18 months in county jail, followed by 5 years of probation. His law enforcement career was over, and his pension was forfeited due to his criminal conviction. Rex, the German shepherd who had attacked Emma, was permanently retired from police service and underwent extensive behavioral rehabilitation at a specialized facility for aggressive dogs. Veterinary behaviorists determined that Rex suffered from a neurological condition that made him unsuitable for police work, a condition that should have been detected years earlier if proper screening protocols had been in place. Sergeant Lisa Park, whose warnings about Rex had been ignored and suppressed, became a whistleblower whose testimony led to broader reforms within the Phoenix Police Department. She was initially ostracized by fellow officers, but eventually became a respected advocate for canine safety protocols and was promoted to lieutenant colonel in charge of the reformed K-9 division. The financial settlement transformed Emma's life in ways that extended far beyond monetary compensation. The bulk of the award was placed in a trust fund that would provide for Emma's education, ongoing therapy, and any future medical needs related to her trauma. Maria used a portion of the settlement to move Emma to a safer neighborhood and to return to school herself, eventually earning a nursing degree and becoming a pediatric trauma specialist. But perhaps the most significant change was in Emma herself. With the help of Dr. Foster's continued therapy and the security of knowing that justice had been served, Emma gradually overcame most of her trauma symptoms. The nightmares became less frequent, and while she remained cautious around large dogs, she was able to enjoy normal childhood activities without debilitating fear. 2 years after the verdict, 5-year-old Emma Rodriguez was thriving in kindergarten at Desert Willow Elementary School. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, described her as a bright, compassionate child with a remarkable ability to stand up for other children who were being bullied, a strength that clearly stemmed from her own experience of facing and overcoming injustice. The Rodriguez case had also transformed the landscape of civil rights litigation involving children. Emma's successful testimony established legal precedent that encouraged other young victims to come forward, leading to a wave of accountability. Cases against institutions that had previously considered themselves immune from challenge by child witnesses. Dr. Amanda Foster published a landmark study based on her work with Emma, demonstrating that children as young as 3 could provide reliable testimony about traumatic events when properly supported and prepared. Her research became required reading in law schools and judicial training programs across the country, fundamentally changing how the legal system approaches cases involving young victims. Sarah Chun's legal practice evolved as well, as she became the go-to attorney for families seeking justice against powerful institutions. The Rodriguez case had established her reputation nationally, and she used her newfound prominence to take on cases involving police misconduct, institutional abuse, and systemic failures that harmed children and families. The media coverage that had initially seemed so intrusive ultimately served a greater purpose. Emma's story inspired legislative changes in 43 states, led to the creation of child advocacy centers in dozens of communities, and raised awareness about the vulnerability of children in encounters with law enforcement. On the third anniversary of the attack, Maria and Emma visited the playground at their old apartment complex where it all began. Emma, now a confident 6-year-old, played happily on the same swings where she had once been terrorized. When a neighbor's friendly golden retriever approached, Emma petted the dog gently, showing no signs of the paralyzing fear that had once consumed her life. "Mommy," Emma said as they prepared to leave that day, "I'm glad I told the truth about the bad doggy. It helped other kids too, didn't it?" Maria hugged her daughter tightly, marveling at the wisdom and courage of the little girl who had changed the world simply by speaking truth to power. "Yes, baby," Maria replied. "You helped a lot of people by being brave." The legacy of Emma Rodriguez's courage continued to ripple outward, creating safer communities, better training protocols, and a legal system more responsive to the needs of its most vulnerable citizens. Her 2 simple words, "bad doggy," had become a rallying cry for accountability and justice that would protect countless children for generations to come. In the end, the smallest voice had created the biggest change, proving that truth, spoken with courage and supported by love, could triumph over even the most powerful institutions when they failed in their duty to protect and serve.